As the Nationals embark on their rebuild entering this offseason, let me ask you this. How much confidence do you have in the Lerner family getting this Nationals team back on track? Let's answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Clary. You can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11, as well as the show page at LO_Nationals. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and search on YouTube Locked On Nationals and hit that subscriber button and make sure to listen, as it's your team every single day with the Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, today's show is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks and you could win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code Locked On, and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So everybody, State of the Union here. Washington Nationals, all fans, whatever you are, however you follow this team, if you're a fan, if you're a family member, let's all gather in together. State of the Union, Washington Nationals. Later on in the show, we're going to get into some player development things as the Nationals have continued to make moves in that department in a crucial time in their rebuild. Let's dive into that later on. Also, how should the Nationals handle this rebuild? There's a lot of different ways the Nationals could go. Could they maybe go the spending route and really splash some in free agency? Could they just build through the farm system, as we've seen with the Baltimore Orioles and as well as a few other teams, as well as the Nationals in the past that they have done under this ownership group? There's a couple different avenues they could go. We'll kind of slice that up then later on. But let's start off with this, because this is really where it starts at. And it's the most cliche thing ever that everyone ever says about any business out there. And what is that exactly? It starts at the top. And the top of this Nationals food chain is the Lerner family. And the Lerner family have controlled this team for well over a decade now. They've won a World Series. They've won 3-4 division titles back in the 2010s. They won the World Series. They've had those triumphant moments. They've splashed on guys like Max Scherzer. They've signed Jason Worth in the past. They have dished out contracts before. We sit here today, 2023, October 11th. The Nationals just had a lot of losing seasons in a row after that 2019 World Series. So where does your confidence stand right now with the Lerner family? Because if you remember back in 2022, right as the season started, the Washington Post reported that the Lerner family will be exploring a potential sale. Well, as we sit here now, there's no clarity on that situation. We don't know where that stands as of right now. So the question really isn't if they're going to sell. The question is, how confident are you in the Lerner family? And the reason why I say that is because we just don't know what's going to happen. Honestly, if you were to tell me that they were going to sell the team by opening day of this year, I would have said, yeah, I'll believe that. But if you told me that they're not going to sell the team and that it was just a rumor, I probably would have said, I believe that too. The reason why I say that, I just don't know what's going to happen at this moment in time. So now let's get into it. Because the confidence with the Lerner family, I think it's a tricky question. But to answer it for myself, whatever you may think, I sit here today and my confidence in the Lerner family is pretty low. Like, just rip that Band-Aid off right there. Let's get to that. The reason why it's low as of right now is because we all know what has been the core kind of issue of this team over the last few years or so. After that 2019 World Series team, I truly believe that the Nationals would have been very different in the ways that they have handled since winning that World Series. Now, I'm not saying you're going to sign Anthony Rendon. I'm not saying you're going to extend Trey Turner and all those other guys. But if you were to really think back at that time, the Lerner family and what they are, number one, they own the Washington Nationals. That is their baby. That is their thing. But also on the other hand, the reason why they got their billions of dollars is because they are real estate kings. They developed Tyson's Corner Mall. If you're from the DMV, you know Tyson's Corner Mall. It's one of the biggest malls in all of America. One of the fastest growing cities in all of America as well. There's a lot of different things that the Lerner family kind of had their hands in on. But one thing kind of stuck out to me is the way that the payroll as a whole has completely just crumbled. And it has. And that is something that you just cannot ignore when you're talking about the Lerner family. So at this moment in time, if you were to ask me, am I confident in this Lerner ownership group getting this team on track? And again, it's a tricky question. The reason why it's a tricky question is because we've had the best and the worst of both of these worlds. In the 2010s, the Nationals payroll under the Lerner ownership group, starting from 2014, they had the number 9 payroll in all of baseball, and they had a top 10 payroll that ran all the way through that. Outside of the 2020 season, they had a top 10 payroll as well in 2021. They had spent the money. They had gotten the assets into getting this Nationals team just simply a lot better than what it was. So when you're talking about, can we be confident in this ownership group? It is a tricky question because you don't know which one you're going to get. You don't know if this is going to be the roll the dice Lerner family kind of ownership stake where they will roll the dice on signing a huge mega contract with Max Scherzer. They will roll the dice on signing a big contract with Jason Worth. They will make these tricky trades and go for Denard Span or whoever else is out there. They will trade for Adam Eaton. There's been a lot of different kind of versions of this ownership group that we have seen. But over the last few years, it's been an unacceptable one. And the reason why I say that is because we know what has been happening. And yes, it has happened across the entire sport. Teams have cut budgets since the pandemic. You can do that in 2020 and 2021. I understand the circumstances that we are in as a society, as businesses as a whole. It made sense as to why they were cutting costs, even if you are still making millions and millions of dollars. It's a business at the end of the day, and they got here because they are smart business people. So beyond that fact of this, as of right now going forward, if the Lerners were to stay as the owners, how much confidence would you have in them, not only to just spend on the current roster, but also spend on your player development guys, as kind of what has been to not been all that great this offseason, as the Nationals have reportedly kind of been budget cutting again. They gutted the scouting department. They gutted the player development department. Now, Mike Rizzo has said that they will be rehiring all of those positions. But it's also, this is kind of something that we have seen at this moment. We've seen this now, and this is starting to be a real thing. This is no longer just your kind of worst fear scenario. This is starting to come into a real life scenario that is a thing. In the fact that they are not spending, that they are not going to spend on this payroll, that they are not going to spend on the analytics to get the player development side up to major league average. That's kind of where we are at with this Lerner ownership group. Now, with all that said, if you were to ask me this, Ryan, do you have any confidence in just looking at the payroll that they will get up to that top 10 area once again? And again, tricky question, but with all that said, I do think that the Lerners can do that eventually. But it's also not just about really constructing this roster and by going into free agency and spending all your money out there. That's not really what this is about. Because in my opinion, I've always believed in this. You build your organization from within, meaning you have to build this thing really from prospects and all other sorts of different angles that you can go by it. Go and work in the trade market. Having a good president of baseball operations like we do with Mike Rizzo. Having a nice manager that can kind of head the foundation of this team and keep the guys in the clubhouse in check, which we do have with Davey Martinez. There's a lot of different avenues and ways that the Nationals can build this thing and get the Lerner ownership group back on track. Because again, it's not just about going out there having a top 10 payroll. You've seen the payrolls this year and how much success the teams have had with that. The Yankees ain't good. Mets, they ain't good. A lot of different things have gone wrong for teams who have spent a ton of money. The San Diego Padres, out of nowhere, have spent a ton of money. They weren't that good this year. So spending money does not just equal wins. It does not. It never has, and it never will. Obviously, does it help? Absolutely. But with this thing, you have to have a perfect marriage of having those prospects and having that farm system, but also making the smart free agency moves. But there is still a fair question because teams have done it both ways. But with Mike Rizzo and the way that he does things and the way that he runs the operations, I think it's a little bit different. But as we kind of said earlier, there are multiple different avenues the way that the Nationals could go about this rebuild, in which, by the way, it's not that far off from hitting the rubber hitting the road and this team taking off and making the postseason. So the different avenues of where to go and where should we go, there's different options to weigh here. Number one, build from within with the farm system. Allocate your assets and really get the most in return for guys like Trey Turner or Max Scherzer, Juan Soto. Use those prospects the way that you used them back in the day. Build up your farm system and spend around those guys. But also, you could spend on some superstars in free agency, which right now the Lerners, they have the money to do it. They do have the money to go out there and make a big splash move. Now, will they do it? That's a different question. But with all that said, there's two different avenues in which the Nationals should and could go down. So the question is, which one will they go down? I'll answer that. But before we get into that, let me tell you guys about our friends over at Sleeper. And guys, the MLB playoffs are here, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is now with studs like Acuna, Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, and more. Pick more or less on stats for these stars like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to 100-time payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. This is what I love about Sleeper. When I can talk to my buddies and all sorts of things in that group chat feature in there, it's the best because we all have that smackboard conversation where we just talk crap all day long. But also when you look at their projections with Sleeper, comparing it to other apps, it's not even close. Sleeper is the one that gets it right. And I want you guys to have the best way possible to play some baseball online, just like I do it and just like all the Locked On Nationals listeners do as well. So make sure you use promo code Locked On and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details, and make sure to use promo code Locked On and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. And thank you for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So now the question is this. There's multiple different avenues in which the Nationals can go by with it. You either build from within, which is kind of the way that I've phrased building it with prospects, building it the way that the Baltimore Orioles did, building it the way that the Mariners did. There's a lot of different ways the Nationals could go. But the other route is you spend in free agency. When you spend in free agency, I'm not just talking about signing your Daniel Murphys of the world or your name that kind of free agent who's a good player, but like not someone that you're necessarily building your team around. So which way should the Nationals go? In number one, let's just say this right here, right now. This is the way that I think. The Nationals, they have to build their team through the farm system for many different reasons. Number one, let's just start right here. The obvious. The Lerner family, we know this. They have not spent the way that they used to back in the day. For whatever reason that is, at this moment, that's above my pay grade. I don't know as to why the Lerner family is not spending. A lot of people may think that it's the fact that they're getting ready to sell and they're just trying to save up all their money, and which good. That's what you should do. That's what smart business people do. Unfortunately, the consumers, you and I, we're at the back end of that, in which we kind of get screwed over, which is kind of been the way. But also, there's different ways to go about a rebuild. There's different ways to build and construct your team. I believe that the Nationals should build through their prospects for many different reasons. Number one, that gives you the options to build around your farm system. And also number two, getting your farm system back to what it once was in the 2010s when you're calling up Bryce Harper, Steven Strasburg, Juan Soto, Anthony Rendon, all those guys, all of them that we all know. That's kind of the way that you build your team. And if you look around baseball with the teams that are here right now, the Atlanta Braves, all those guys, a lot of them at least, are from their own farm system. A lot of those guys developed by the Atlanta Braves. Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, all the guys, all of them. They were all theirs. Dansby Swanson from back then. All of them. Freddie Freeman, the Philadelphia Phillies, Bryson Stott, Alec Boehm, Bryce Harper they signed. We all know that. Aaron Nola, drafted and developed. If you look around baseball, the Arizona Diamondbacks, they've all done the same thing. The Los Angeles Dodgers, they have spent on Mookie Betts, they've spent on Freddie Freeman, but even then, a lot of their guys that's filled around those stars are guys that they have developed and guys that they have done a great job at developing. Even beyond that, the Cincinnati Reds and what they did this year, all those guys are theirs that they have developed. Baseball right now is about the young, developed prospects. And there's good news with that. The Nationals, they have a top-heavy farm system. They have guys, Dylan Cruz, James Wood, Brady House. These guys have superstar ceilings. Say it as it is. That is their ceiling. Is that what they're going to be? Who knows at this point? But that is their ceiling. You also have Robert Hassel, Elijah Green, who's also still in that conversation of having a superstar kind of ceiling. Again, not saying those guys are going to reach that, but that is their ceiling. That's the kind of talents that they possess. There's many different avenues in which the Nationals could go with this rebuild. But you have to go through the farm system for many different reasons as of right now. Because again, they have not spent their money consistently in a way that you can say they're going to fill these gaps in which we do have on this roster right now. They are going to spend on a starting pitcher. They are going to spend on a first baseman or a second baseman or another bullpen arm. You can't put that faith in them right now. But there's good news in this. The Nationals, and specifically Mike Rizzo, these guys have done this before. They have had this rebuild before. They have built up their farm system and have done so really well. Now, the way that they did that back in the day was a little bit different considering what they have done this year and over the last few years. Because the Nationals, as we know now, lottery in baseball, you can't just suck all year and get the number one pick like the Orioles have done. You can't do that anymore. You can't do that like the way that the Nationals did back in the late 2000s. You just can't do it. It's not going to happen. Baseball rules in the new CBA, which stinks, by the way. That's just the way that the game is now. But even furthermore than that, you don't have to suck to hit on prospects because it's not necessarily about where you're drafting. It's more so about the way that you develop players and the way that you invest in player development and many different ways that you can kind of spread that love around that we're going to get into later on. But the Nationals, they have to go through the farm system because they have to finish what they have started right now. They have started something that is actually good. You've hit on Brady House from what it seems like. You've hit on your trades with Mackenzie Gore and C.J. Abrams and James Wood, who's also included in this. There's many different things about this team that you can say, I like this, even at the major league level when you're talking about Abrams, Ruiz, Gray, Gore, all of those guys, Jake Irvin even. There's a lot of different things to like about this team at the major league level. But there's also a lot to love about what's going down in the minor leagues and the way that the Nationals can build this thing from the top up. And I think that's the way that the Nationals should build it. Just because we see the Yankees dropping $300 million on Garrett Cole or whatever it is, just because you see the Los Angeles Dodgers going for $200 million for Freddie Freeman, just because you're going to see someone pay Juan Soto over $420 million someday, doesn't mean the fact that is that you have to do that as well. Because the last time I checked, when was the last time those teams won a World Series? And yes, obviously it does help. I'm no idiot. I understand as to why people spend. It's to make your team better. It's not to make your team worse. But it also just doesn't work out all the time. Ask the San Diego Padres. They have the most talent that you could say in all of baseball. The New York Mets, they had the most talent in all of baseball. Both those teams are sitting where the Nationals are sitting right now. And I can tell you this, those fans of those teams are in a lot worse situations than what we are right now. Now, would I like to be a Padres fan rooting on Manny Machado, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis, and all the talent that they have? Hell yes, I would. Do I want to be a Mets fan? No. But would I like to be in that situation where you have all that talent, you ooze talent? Yeah, I would like that. But also, you're not winning still. And this is an organization talking about the Mets. They haven't won in a long time. A long time. There's a lot of different ways the Nationals can go with this. Plenty of them, in fact. But the way that you have to do it, in my opinion, with the way that the Nationals are constructed currently, and the way that we probably project them to be constructed, is through the farm system. And when you build through the farm system, it matters. One thing matters. One thing. That is player development. Let's talk about investing in player development and really kind of what that means for this Nationals team, as admittedly, they've gutted the player development department. They took away John Watson, the director of player development for this team since prior to the 2022 season, who seemed to have done a pretty good job on duty here. But even then, short sample size, he was let go of his duties. So let's get into that, what they need to do, what needs to happen in order to make us feel confident about this rebuild going forward. But before we get into that, let me tell you guys about our good friends over at Jase Medical. And guys, modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jase Medical is your solution. Just fill out their online form, and one of Jase Medical's board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then Jase will send your prescriptions to one of their partner pharmacies where your order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. You can also send your physician a message for answers to treatment-related questions anytime. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Now let's get into it, as we all know by now, John Watson, director of player development, was let go of his, or will not be renewed of his duties with the Washington Nationals. Someone who saw the player development side of this, which has to do with a lot of different guys in the way that they develop. But the reason why they let go of it, in my opinion, was probably just as simple as this. They probably did not see eye to eye. When I mean I probably mean Mike Rizzo in the way that John Watson. Now, again, I know nothing. But it is weird that the fact is that they did move on and move off him after just 2 years on the job. Because when you're talking about developing prospects, there's a lot of different things to account for. Number one is, how much talent do you truly have in the farm system? 2 years ago, the Nationals had nothing. Nothing. You had Keibert Ruiz, Josiah Gray, Cade Cavalli. That's it. That's really all you had. But since then, the Nationals, they now do have a top 10 farm system. Thanks to a Juan Soto trade in 2022, that helps you out a lot. That helps out the job of John Watson. You don't really have to answer for all too many questions because you had a lot of talent in that trade that a lot of people in baseball have kind of crowned, and really in sports, have crowned as one of the biggest hauls in sports history for getting just for one player. And that was for Juan Soto, and that was the expectation as well. So we all knew that the farm system was going to take a huge turn after last season, which it did. The Nationals have a top 10 farm system. But when you talk about development, let's kind of forget about the Padres guys. Look at the guys that we have right here, right now, over the last few years. Jake Irvin, number one. He has developed really nicely. Kind of someone who was drafted later on in the rounds, had Tommy John surgery, got called up this year. Not many people expected too much with him, but he pitched quality innings. He had quality starts multiple times there over. You look at Jacob Young, another guy, later round draft pick, out of college, not much really to expect with him. This year, hit the ground running, made it up to the major leagues, and jumped and climbed 3 different levels. It was a very impressive season for Jacob Young. There's a lot of different things that you can look at with this team. Mitchell Parker, DJ Hers, and a lot of guys that you can say, well, Dijon Watson certainly has his hand in that. And he does. He probably does. But also this. I don't know why they let go of Dijon Watson. I don't. But I also think that there's obviously some sort of reason as to why they did. And number one is this. The Lerner family, they did invest into analytics a lot last offseason. If you remember, we talked about it a lot. And as of really what they did specifically, we don't really know what they did. Like, what equipment did they invest in? Who did they invest in? Which numbers guy did they invest in? Whichever it is. We just know that they invested in analytics as what was reported by many different outlets. I'm sure we could pull that up and decide which one they developed, but whatever. That's beyond the point. You have to invest in the player development side if you were to go to the route that we kind of talked about, which is going to be building from the in through the out, meaning building up your farm system, getting that farm system up to where it should be, which it is already. It's already above average. But even then, you talk about this. Dylan Cruz, James Wood, Brady House, Robert Hassel, Cade Cavalli. All those guys are at the top. Now, if you look at the Los Angeles Dodgers, for example, again, another top 3 farm system in all of baseball, even after being so good for all these years. They've done a lot of different things right. Number one, the international department. They kill it. They make a killing in the international department. They sign guys who are constantly not ranked in the top 50 prospects in the international signing pool. And guess what? It turns out to be a lot of good guys. Yordan Alvarez back in the day, who was traded for some nobody reliever. Yordan Alvarez, the guy who mashes home runs every other night for the Houston Astros. That was a Los Angeles Dodgers international signee. There's a lot of different guys. O'Neal Cruz as well for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Traded for nothing back in the day. An international signee by the Los Angeles Dodgers. They do it their own way. The Nationals and the international department, you can talk about Juan Soto, Johnny DePuglia, hat tip. Thank you for that. Because you were the guy supposedly who found Juan Soto and would not let him leave. You did good. Thank you. But beyond that, beyond the international side, we can talk about those failures. Victor Robles. There's also other guys that in the past that we probably haven't even discussed on the show because they just have not made a single impact down in the minor leagues. But the Nationals have to develop and they have to really invest in player development as a whole in order to take these next steps as an organization. Now, how does that look? Where should that look? Number one, you got to get a director of player development. And you have to get someone who's willing to kind of go into the nitty-gritty of this rebuild and take advantage of the things that you haven't done as an organization, like hitting in your draft picks, developing your random prospects who are drafted in the 10th round, developing your random 20th best international prospect, your 60th best prospect in your organization, developing those guys who seemingly come out of nowhere for other organizations that just have not happened here at a consistent rate. Player development matters. Simple. That's really what it comes down to this year. So if you were to ask me, kind of tie everything together here today, would you rather make a splash signing in free agency and sign Aaron Nola to a 1-year deal? Or would you rather go all in on your player development, your scouting, your analytics this offseason and allocate your money towards that instead of an Aaron Nola type? That door to the right that says analytics, player development, all the other things, I want to invest money in that because that is what the teams do nowadays that don't spend their money. And the team that right now that does not spend their money is unfortunately the Washington Nationals, which is an issue in itself. But there's ways that you can balance it. And the way that you can balance it is by investing in player development. State of the Union. Washington Nationals. Today we were supposed to have Andrew Golden on. A little change of schedules there. We'll catch up with them sometime next week now. But that was your State of the Union. We needed to get that off our chest as it's been a tough go for some Nationals fans, including myself, over the last few years. But good news, we're on the up. We're going to come up. We're going to be good again. I'll catch you guys on the flip side. And of course, go Nats. Phillies, you stink.